On the festival's red carpet, Victor stares at three pairs of green eyes identical to his own as Naomi appears radiant, her short hair swaying, and he understands that his secret never ceased to exist. But before we dive into the full story, let me know where you're watching from and what time it is. Now, subscribe to the channel and let's get started. New York, 2008. The first snowfall of winter dusted Manhattan's skyline as Naomi Taylor stood frozen in the pristine marble bathroom of Victor Harrington's Upper East Side triplex. Her trembling hands clutched the pregnancy test, its pink double line unmistakable in the harsh bathroom light. 25 years old and thousands of miles from her parents' modest Brooklyn apartment, Naomi felt her carefully constructed world crumbling beneath her feet. "This can't be happening," she whispered, her Jamaican accent thickening with stress as it always did when she was upset. 6 months of secret encounters with her employer, midnight rendezvous in the guest bedroom on the 31st floor, stolen kisses in the pantry when the rest of the staff had gone, had culminated in this plastic stick that now held her fate. Victor Harrington was not just any employer. At 38, he was the youngest investment director at Goldman Sachs, heir to a financial dynasty spanning 3 generations on Wall Street. His family name adorned buildings, hospital wings, and university halls across Manhattan. Naomi was merely the live-in housekeeper, hired through a premium domestic staffing agency after she'd been forced to abandon her performing arts scholarship at New York University. The tuition had become impossible after her father's illness drained their modest savings. The affair had begun innocently enough. Late-night encounters in the kitchen when Victor returned from business dinners. His tie loosened, jacket discarded, a different man from the stern, demanding employer who barked orders during daylight hours. "You're different from the others," he'd told her one night, his emerald green eyes holding hers as he poured himself a scotch. "There's something special about you, Naomi. Something real." She'd believed him, believed every whispered promise, every lingering touch, every implicit suggestion that their relationship transcended the stark employer-employee divide. Now, with morning sickness making her uniform feel tighter each day, Naomi realized how naive she'd been. She rehearsed her speech while changing the sheets on his California king bed, smoothing Egyptian cotton with mechanical precision while practicing the words. "I'm pregnant. I thought you should know. I understand if you need time to process." Each scenario she imagined ended with Victor embracing the news, perhaps after initial shock. After all, he'd whispered, "You're amazing," against her skin countless times. That had to mean something. Thursday afternoon, she finally gathered her courage. Victor was reviewing reports in his mahogany-paneled study, the Manhattan skyline a glittering backdrop through floor-to-ceiling windows. Snow fell more heavily now, coating Central Park in pristine white visible from his 33rd floor vantage point. "Mr. Harrington," she began formally, standing in the doorway, hands clasped to stop them from shaking. "May I speak with you?" He didn't look up from his documents. "Make it quick, Taylor. I have a conference call in 15 minutes. She stepped inside, closing the heavy door behind her. This was the first time she'd entered his study during working hours. It felt like trespassing. "I'm pregnant," she said, the words tumbling out before courage deserted her. The silence that followed cut sharper than the winter wind howling against the panoramic windows. Victor's Mont Blanc pen paused mid-signature, hovering above a contract. "That's impossible," he finally responded, still not looking up. "We took precautions." Apparently, they weren't enough. It was then that Victor Harrington finally raised his gaze to meet hers. Those emerald eyes, so seductive weeks before, now cold as the East River in January. "How far along?" "Clinical, detached. Almost 3 months." He closed the leather portfolio with a dry snap. "And you're certain it's mine?" The question landed like a slap. "Of course it's yours. There hasn't been anyone else." Victor leaned back in his Italian leather chair, studying her as if she were a disappointing investment. A black housekeeper from Brooklyn expecting a mixed-race child from the Harrington heir? Do you comprehend the absurdity of that, don't you?" Each word carved away another piece of her heart. Naomi struggled to breathe, to remain standing while her world collapsed. "I'm weeks away from making partner," he continued, his voice emotionless. "There's a marriage being negotiated with the Rothstein daughter. Their family controls half the real estate in Midtown." He shook his head slowly. "Did you really think this was more than temporary entertainment?" Naomi remained motionless, his words hitting her like blades. "I'll be generous because you've been discreet thus far." Victor opened his drawer, withdrew his checkbook, and scribbled with his Mont Blanc. $20,000, sufficient to solve your problem and start over somewhere else, perhaps Chicago, or better yet, go back to Jamaica. New York clearly isn't for you. "I won't get an abortion," Naomi declared, her voice steadier than expected. Victor's laughter echoed through the office. "Then use the money to raise your bastard. But understand something, Taylor. I was born to command. You were born to serve. People like you don't mix with people like me. That's the natural order of things." He extended the check. "I'll be traveling to London tomorrow. I want you and your things gone by then." Naomi stared at the check, the amount a pittance compared to the golden parachutes Victor negotiated for failing CEOs daily. An insulting sum to erase a human life. Her child. Their child. "How can you be so cruel?" she whispered. "I thought what we had was real." Something flickered in his eyes. Regret, perhaps, or simply irritation at having this inconvenient conversation. "What we had was convenience, Taylor. You were here. You were willing. That's all." His phone buzzed and he glanced at it. "My call is in 5 minutes. Will there be anything else?" The dismissal couldn't have been clearer. Naomi placed her house key on his desk. "No, Mr. Harrington. There's nothing else." That November night, under a merciless rain, Naomi left the luxurious Fifth Avenue building carrying a suitcase and a check insufficient to secure a dignified future anywhere in New York. The doorman, who had always greeted her warmly before, avoided her eyes as she walked out the service entrance for the final time. In the crowded subway back to Brooklyn, she cried silently, remembering each whispered promise, each moment of false intimacy. Her parents would be devastated. Devout Christians who had sacrificed everything to bring their family from Kingston to America, they had dreamed of her becoming the first college graduate in their family. Instead, she would return home unmarried and pregnant. As the train rumbled beneath the East River, Naomi placed her hand on her still flat stomach. "I don't know how," she whispered to the life growing inside her, "but I promise you'll never feel unwanted. We'll make it somehow." She couldn't have known then that somehow would involve being thrown out of her parents' home, her father's thundering voice declaring her dead to them. Couldn't have foreseen the tiny basement room in Bedford-Stuyvesant she would rent, or the 2 exhausting jobs she would take. Receptionist at a dental clinic by day, waitress at a Williamsburg diner by night. When the train emerged from the tunnel, Manhattan's glittering skyline receded behind her. A fairy tale kingdom where she had briefly, foolishly thought she belonged. The rain streaked the windows, distorting the lights of the city that had first welcomed, then crushed her dreams. "One day," Naomi whispered, steel entering her voice as she watched Manhattan disappear. "One day, Victor Harrington will look at me not as the housekeeper he discarded, but as the woman he should have valued. One day, he'll realize what he threw away." As the rain lashed against the subway windows, Naomi couldn't imagine that 15 years later, at an elite gala in the Metropolitan Museum of Art, Victor Harrington would bow before the woman he had dismissed as insignificant, now transformed into the magnate who would buy the remains of his failing empire. Rain pelted Naomi's face as she trudged through Brooklyn's dimly lit streets, her suitcase wheels catching on cracked sidewalks. The $20,000 check burned in her pocket, blood money from the man who had called their unborn child a problem. She arrived at her parents' modest brownstone in Crown Heights just before midnight, soaked to the bone and shivering. Naomi? Her mother's sleepy voice called from the living room where she'd fallen asleep waiting. Joyce Taylor was still in her nursing scrubs, having just finished a double shift. "What are you doing here, child? Is everything all right?" Naomi dropped her suitcase in the narrow hallway. How could she possibly explain? "I lost my job," she began, her voice barely audible over the rain hammering against the windows. Her mother's concerned expression deepened. "That fancy Manhattan job? What happened?" Naomi's voice cracked. "Mama, I'm pregnant." The silence that followed was heavier than anything Victor had inflicted. Joyce's warm brown eyes widened, then hardened. "The father?" she asked simply. "My employer. And he fired you because of the baby?" Naomi nodded, tears finally spilling. Joyce sighed deeply, the weight of generations of black women who had faced similar betrayals evident in her shoulders. "Your father can't know tonight. He's sleeping. Tomorrow we'll figure this out." But morning brought no solutions, only thunder. "Pregnant by your white boss? Do you have any idea what you've done?" Samuel Taylor's voice boomed through the small apartment. A deacon at their Jamaican Pentecostal church, he'd built his entire identity around respectability and hard work. "After everything we sacrificed to get you that university scholarship. Daddy, please, no daughter of mine spreads her legs for her employer like some plantation throwback." His fist came down on the dining table, rattling dishes from the breakfast no one was eating. Joyce tried to intercede. "Samuel, she needs our help now." "Help? She needs Jesus and common sense, not help. We raised her better than this." For 3 days, Naomi weathered the storm of her father's disappointment and her mother's tearful prayers. On the 4th morning, she found Joyce in the kitchen, her eyes red-rimmed but resolute. "Your father won't change his mind," she whispered, pressing folded bills into Naomi's palm. $200. It's all I have from my emergency fund. He says you have until tonight to leave." "Mama, where will I go?" "I don't know, child. But you can't stay here with him like this. It's not good for the baby." That afternoon, while her father was at church, Naomi packed her remaining belongings. As she zipped her suitcase, Joyce pressed a small gold cross necklace into her hand. "My mother gave this to me when I left Jamaica. Now I give it to you. Remember, God hasn't abandoned you, even if it feels that way." With a final embrace that felt like goodbye, Naomi stepped back into uncertainty. The subsequent 2 weeks became a blur of rejections. Rental applications denied due to her unemployment and pregnancy. Friends from college suddenly too busy to return calls. The check from Victor remained undeposited. Accepting it felt like validating his dismissal of their child's worth. Finally, through a bulletin board posting at a women's clinic, Naomi found a basement apartment in Bedford-Stuyvesant, a far cry from the Manhattan luxury she'd grown accustomed to. The ceiling leaked, the single window sat at street level, and roaches scattered when she flipped the light switch. But at $800 monthly, it was all she could afford. Using Victor's check for the deposit and first month's rent left her with little for essentials. The pregnancy made standing for hours excruciating, but she had no choice. A position as a receptionist at a dental clinic in Flatbush covered daytime hours, while evenings meant waiting tables at an all-night diner in Williamsburg. "You're too slow," Barry, the diner manager, barked one night, gripping her arm as she struggled to balance a tray of dishes. "Customers are complaining. One more night like this, and you're done." Naomi nodded, too exhausted to argue. 16-hour workdays while battling morning sickness had hollowed her. Dark circles shadowed her once bright eyes, and her uniform hung loose everywhere except her gradually swelling midsection. 4 months into her pregnancy, Dr. Eleanor Kim frowned at the ultrasound screen during Naomi's checkup at the free clinic. "Ms. Taylor, when was your last full night's sleep?" she asked, moving the transducer across Naomi's abdomen. "I don't remember," Naomi admitted. Working 2 jobs left little time for rest. The doctor's frown deepened as she studied the monitor. "I need to check something." She adjusted settings, moved the wand again, then called over her shoulder, "Rachel, can you get Dr. Williams in here?" Naomi's heart rate spiked. "Is something wrong with my baby?" "Not wrong, doctor," Kim replied cautiously. "Just unexpected." Dr. Williams, a maternal-fetal medicine specialist, entered and studied the screen intently. "Yes, I see them. Good spotting, Eleanor." "See what?" Naomi struggled to sit up. "What's happening?" Dr. Williams turned the screen toward her. "Ms. Taylor, you're not having a baby. You're having 3 identical triplets." The room spun. 3 babies? On her meager income? In her leaky basement? "That's impossible," she whispered. I can't raise 3 babies alone. I can barely afford one." Tears streamed down her face as panic overwhelmed her. Dr. Kim dismissed the technician and sat beside Naomi, taking her trembling hands. "Do you have family support? Anyone who can help?" Through sobs, Naomi explained her situation. The father who had rejected both her and his children, parents who had turned their backs, the 2 jobs barely keeping her afloat. Dr. Kim reached into her desk drawer and retrieved a glossy brochure. "There's a program called Artist Mothers of New York. It's an NGO that supports women in creative fields through pregnancy and early motherhood." "I'm not an artist anymore," Naomi said bitterly. "I had to drop out of theater school." "You said you were studying performing arts before this happened. That qualifies." The doctor pressed the brochure into her hands. "They provide community, resources, sometimes even housing. They might be your safety net." 3 days later, Naomi sat nervously in a circle of women at a community center in Greenwich Village, the brochure crumpled in her sweaty palm. The room buzzed with conversation. Photographers, dancers, writers, all women balancing artistic dreams with motherhood's demands. "Welcome, newcomers," a tall black woman with silver-streaked dreadlocks called out. "I'm Zoe Washington, documentary filmmaker and group facilitator. We're here because society tells creative women to choose, art or motherhood. We're here to call bullshit on that false dichotomy." Laughter rippled through the room. Naomi found herself smiling for the first time in months. When her turn came to introduce herself, words failed initially. How could she distill her catastrophe into a palatable introduction? "I'm Naomi," she finally managed. "Former theater student. Currently a receptionist and waitress. Pregnant with triplets. Their father was my employer who—" Her voice deepened with emotion. "Who said I was born to serve, not to rise above my station?" The raw honesty silenced the room. Then Zoe leaned forward, her gaze intense. "And what do you think about that assessment?" Something ignited in Naomi's chest, a spark of the defiance she'd buried under survival. "I think he's wrong. I think I was born to be more than someone's convenient entertainment." Zoe nodded approvingly. "Your voice, it's remarkable. So rich and expressive, even when just speaking. Do you sing?" "I used to, before." After the meeting, Zoe approached her. "I'm working on a documentary about women abandoned during pregnancy. It's called Left Behind. I need a narrator with authenticity, someone who's lived it, not just read a script." Naomi stared, disbelieving. "You want me to narrate your film? I have no experience." "Experience is overrated. Authenticity is rare." Zoe handed her a business card. "The pay is modest, $4,000 for the session, but it might be a foot back into the creative world." $4,000, almost 5 months' rent. In June of 2009, 7 months pregnant with a prominent triplet belly, Naomi sat in a dimly lit recording booth. Behind the glass, sound engineers adjusted levels while Zoe directed. From the top, Zoe instructed. "Remember, you're not just reading words, you're speaking for every woman who's been discarded when she became inconvenient." Naomi closed her eyes, one hand resting on her swollen abdomen. When she spoke, her voice carried the weight of her journey. "They tell us we are strong when what they mean is we have no choice but to endure. They praise our resilience when what they should question is why we must be resilient in the first place. The recording session lasted 4 hours. When she finished, the control room erupted in applause. The sound engineer wiped tears from his eyes. "That was incredible," he said. "Your experience comes through in every word." 2 weeks later, contractions woke Naomi at 3 in the morning. Too early, too soon. The babies weren't due for another month. When the ambulance arrived at her apartment, Zoe was already there, having responded immediately to Naomi's panicked call. "I've got you," Zoe promised, squeezing her hand as paramedics transferred her to a stretcher. "You and those babies are not alone anymore." In the delivery room, surrounded by medical teams prepared for high-risk multiple births, Naomi fought for her children's lives. After 17 hours of labor, Elijah arrived first, his cry weak but determined. Isaiah followed 4 minutes later. Then Noah completed the trio. 3 perfect, tiny boys, each weighing just over 4 pounds, each bearing the unmistakable emerald green eyes of the man who had deemed them unworthy of his name. As Naomi placed her finger in each tiny palm through the incubator's port, a nurse remarked, "Those green eyes are breathtaking. Did they get them from their father?" Naomi met the woman's gaze steadily. "They got their best parts from me." While her newborn sons fought in the NICU, Naomi found unexpected allies. The Artist Mothers Network organized meal deliveries to her apartment. A furniture designer donated 3 handcrafted cribs. A photographer offered free newborn portraits once the boys came home. During those first grueling months of motherhood, while recording the narration for Left Behind, Naomi discovered something unexpected. Her voice, once valued only for its ability to take orders in a luxury penthouse, was now opening doors she thought permanently closed. When Left Behind won the special jury prize at the Tribeca Documentary Festival, Naomi's phone rang with her first professional offer, a supporting role in an independent production, specifically written after the director heard her narration. While assinava seu primeiro contrato profissional na área criativa, Naomi não poderia prever que sua voz, a mesma que Victor Harrington havia silenciado, se tornaria uma das mais reconhecidas e valiosas da indústria de entretenimento. The sound of her voice, the same voice Victor Harrington had dismissed as insignificant, filled the recording studio with an emotional depth that left the production team speechless. Naomi Taylor had just completed the final recording session for Left Behind, her rich contralto capturing the heartbreak and resilience of abandoned mothers across America. "That's a wrap," called the sound engineer, his eyes suspiciously moist. "Naomi, I've recorded A-listers who couldn't bring half the authenticity you just delivered." 7 months pregnant, her triplet belly straining against the maternity dress Zoe had lent her, Naomi struggled to rise from the padded stool. Pride temporarily overshadowed her exhaustion. She had earned $4,000 in 2 days of recording, more than a month of combined wages from her other jobs. "You've given this project its soul," Zoe said, helping her gather her things. "The director's already talking about festival submissions." As they left the studio, a sharp pain sliced through Naomi's abdomen. She gasped, clutching the doorframe. "Naomi?" Zoe's voice seemed distant through the sudden fog of pain. "Something's wrong," she whispered, feeling warmth trickle down her inner thigh. "The babies, they're coming." The next 12 hours passed in a blur of hospital corridors, urgent medical terms, and waves of excruciating pain. At 34 weeks, the triplets were dangerously premature. A team of neonatal specialists stood ready as Naomi fought through labor, Zoe firmly gripping her hand. "You can do this," Zoe whispered fiercely when Naomi whimpered that she couldn't continue. "Those boys need their warrior mother." Elijah arrived first at 4:17 in the morning, his cry barely audible, weighing 4 pounds, 3 ounces. Isaiah followed 11 minutes later, slightly smaller but louder. Noah, the smallest at 3 pounds, 15 ounces, emerged last, silent until a doctor stimulated his tiny chest. 3 identical miniature humans, each connected to monitors and oxygen, were whisked to the NICU before Naomi could properly see their faces. 6 hours later, a nurse wheeled her to the neonatal intensive care unit. 3 incubators formed a triangle in the corner, each containing a tiny form wrapped in tubes and wires. Naomi pressed her hand against the clear plastic, tears streaming unchecked. "They're fighters," the nurse assured her, "all breathing on their own, which is remarkable for triplets this premature." As if responding to her voice, Elijah, distinguished by a tiny blue bracelet, opened his eyes. Emerald green, unmistakably Victor's eyes, stared back at her with an old soul's intensity. "Those eyes are stunning," the nurse remarked. "Their father must be—" "Not in the picture," Naomi interrupted firmly, her finger gently touching the plastic separating her from her firstborn. "But that's okay. We don't need him." The days blurred into an exhausting routine, pumping breast milk every 3 hours, dividing time between 3 incubators, learning to change diapers the size of her palm, all while recovering from a difficult delivery. Naomi barely slept, terrified that if she closed her eyes, one of her fragile sons might slip away. On the triplets' 5th day of life, Dr. Patel, the neonatal specialist, pulled her aside. "Ms. Taylor, you need rest. You're no good to these boys if you collapse." "I can't leave them," she protested. "You won't be," Zoe interjected, appearing at the NICU entrance. "The Artist Mothers Network has organized a rotation. Someone will be here every hour you can't be." Naomi stared at the small group of women behind Zoe, artists, musicians, writers, all nodding reassuringly. "But they're my responsibility." "It takes a village," an older painter named Ruth said simply. "Today, we're your village." For the first time since the birth, Naomi slept for 6 uninterrupted hours in Zoe's guest bedroom, waking to find 3 carefully labeled bottles of pumped milk in the refrigerator that she didn't remember preparing. After 23 days in the NICU, the triplets, now each over 5 pounds, were discharged on the same summer morning. Naomi's basement apartment, transformed by the Artist Mothers Network, now contained 3 second-hand cribs, a changing station, and more newborn supplies than she could have afforded in a year. The first months passed in sleepless delirium. While other mothers struggled with 1 newborn, Naomi juggled 3 identical infants with the same needs at the same time. When one settled, another wailed. Feedings took hours, as each boy needed to be held and burped individually. Laundry multiplied exponentially, tiny onesies and burp cloths constantly cycling through the building's coin-operated machines. "I don't know how you're doing this," Zoe marveled one evening, helping fold minuscule socks while 3 infants finally slept. "One breath at a time," Naomi answered, dark circles under her eyes contrasting with her determined expression. "I keep reminding myself that every day we survive is proof Victor was wrong about me." Their survival depended on the kindness of the artistic community. A composer watched the triplets while Naomi interviewed for part-time reception work. A costume designer altered donated clothes to fit their tiny frames. A photographer took professional portraits in exchange for Naomi's narration on her art installation audio guide. When the boys reached 9 months, sitting up, babbling, their identical faces showing unique expressions despite identical features, Naomi received an unexpected call from Zoe. "Turn on PBS now," her friend demanded without greeting. Naomi fumbled for the remote while supervising the triplets on their playmat. The television flickered to life, showing a documentary festival award ceremony. For its unflinching portrayal of maternal abandonment and resilience, the special jury prize goes to Left Behind, directed by Marcus Chen, narrated by Naomi Taylor. The phone slipped from her fingers as she watched Marcus accept the award, explicitly thanking the extraordinary voice of Naomi Taylor, whose lived experience breathes truth into every word. The recognition led to Naomi's first acting offer since abandoning her theater studies, a supporting role in an independent film by a director who'd been moved by her narration. "It's only 5 scenes," the director explained over coffee while Zoe watched the triplets. "But your voice, there's something about it that communicates both vulnerability and strength, exactly what this character needs." The modest payment would cover 3 months' rent, a financial breathing space Naomi hadn't experienced since the boy's birth. Life settled into a grueling but manageable rhythm: part-time receptionist work, occasional voiceover gigs, and motherhood's constant demands. The boys grew, developing distinct personalities despite their identical appearance. Elijah, firstborn and watchful; Isaiah, musical from his earliest coos; Noah, quietest but most intensely observant. On a particularly difficult night shortly before their 2nd birthday, all 3 toddlers spiked fevers simultaneously. After hours of alternating cool baths, medicine administration, and soothing cries, Naomi finally collapsed into her bed at 3 a.m, too exhausted even to change from her vomit-stained shirt. Unable to sleep despite her fatigue, she reached for an old tablet Zoe had given her, a cast-off from a technology upgrade. Opening a blank document, she began typing what she intended as simply a therapeutic release. "He said I was born to serve, not to rise. He said our child was a problem to be solved with a check. He never imagined there would be 3 of them, 3 perfect mirrors of his eyes, growing up without his name or his money. 3 reasons I get up when exhaustion tells me to stay down." Words poured out until dawn light filtered through her basement window. When she finally looked up, 30 pages of raw, honest prose filled the screen. The skeleton of a screenplay about a Caribbean immigrant housekeeper discarded by her wealthy white employer when she became pregnant. 3 days later, Zoe stopped by with groceries and found Naomi frantically typing while the triplets napped. "What's this?" she asked, glancing at the tablet. "Nothing. Just therapy." Naomi tried to close the document, but Zoe gently took the tablet. Silence fell as she scrolled through the pages, her expression growing increasingly animated. After several minutes, she looked up with wide eyes. "This isn't therapy, Naomi. This is gold. Raw, unpolished gold. It's just my story. Nobody cares about a housekeeper getting pregnant by her boss. This isn't just about pregnancy. It's about power, race, class, the American myth of meritocracy." Zoe sat beside her on the worn couch. With some structure and development, this could be an incredible screenplay. Naomi stared at her tiny apartment, at the 3 toddlers sleeping on a shared mattress in the corner, at the stack of past-due notices on her counter. "I'm going to finish it," she said suddenly, a new resolve hardening her voice. "I'm going to write our story, and it's going to pay for their future." Zoe squeezed her hand. "Yes, you are, and I'll help however I can." That night, after tucking her sons into bed, Naomi placed 3 gentle kisses on 3 identical foreheads. "I promise," she whispered to their sleeping forms, "I'll transform this pain into something that will make you proud one day." Hunched over her tablet in the dim light of her apartment, Naomi couldn't imagine that those pages born from pain would transform into the screenplay that would open Hollywood's doors and place her name among the industry's most coveted new talents. Dawn broke over Brooklyn as Naomi established her new routine. The alarm blared at 4 a.m, jolting her from precious few hours of sleep. She silenced it immediately, holding her breath as she glanced toward the corner where her 3 sons slept on their shared mattress. Their synchronized breathing remained undisturbed, a small miracle she counted on for these precious morning hours. Padding silently to the tiny bathroom, she splashed cold water on her face and stared at her reflection. Dark circles shadowed her eyes, and at 28, fine lines had begun to appear at their corners. Motherhood and hardship were aging her prematurely, but determination burned in her gaze. 4 hours, she whispered to herself. 4 hours to write before they wake. The tablet's blue glow illuminated her face as she settled at the rickety kitchen table. Opening the document titled Broken Chains, she'd abandoned the working title Born to Serve as too bitter. She immersed herself in the world of Nadia, her protagonist, a Jamaican immigrant housekeeper whose wealthy employer discards her upon learning of her pregnancy. The words flowed easily, particularly when she channeled Victor's dismissive cruelty. "People like you don't mix with people like me," she typed, the fictional Marcus telling Nadia, the same words Victor had spoken in his mahogany-paneled study 3 years earlier. Her fingers trembled slightly, but she pushed through, transforming personal humiliation into art. By 7:30, the first stirrings from the boys' corner signaled the end of her writing time. Naomi quickly saved her work, another 10 pages completed, before switching modes. Breakfast preparations, diaper changes, and the orchestrated chaos of dressing 3 active toddlers consumed the next hour. "Mommy work now," she explained, kissing each identical forehead as she dropped them at the subsidized daycare center 2 blocks away. The monthly fee consumed nearly half her receptionist's salary, but allowed her to work the 8 to 3 shift at Williamsburg Family Dentistry. Dr. Goldstein's office was mercifully understanding about her situation. "My mother raised 4 children alone after my father died," the elderly dentist had told her during her interview. "Single mothers are the strongest people I know." Still, the hours behind the reception desk drained her. Scheduling appointments, filing insurance claims, and maintaining a professional smile while worrying about her son's welfare required constant emotional labor. During her lunch break, she often found a quiet corner to scribble notes for evening writing sessions, character insights that flashed through her mind between phone calls. At 3:15, she rushed to collect the triplets, now fully verbal at almost 3 years old and bursting with energy. The hours between pickup and bedtime were a whirlwind. Dinner preparation, baths, stories, and the occasional meltdown requiring superhuman patience. Only after 8:30, when 3 pairs of emerald eyes finally closed, could she return to her manuscript. Often exhaustion overwhelmed her creative drive, her head nodding over the tablet until she gave in to sleep. But determination pushed her forward. Each completed page represented one step closer to financial independence, one more proof that Victor Harrington had underestimated her. Zoe became her first reader and informal editor, stopping by weekly to review new pages while the boys played. "This dialogue is brilliant," she commented one evening, reading a confrontation scene where Nadia finally stands up to her former employer. "You've captured the power dynamic perfectly." "It's what I wish I'd said," Naomi admitted, folding a mountain of tiny socks, instead of standing there taking his abuse. "You're saying it now," Zoe replied, "and millions will hear it when this becomes a film," Naomi scoffed. "If it becomes a film." "When?" Zoe insisted. "This story needs to be told. 6 months of this punishing schedule, writing at dawn, working all day, mothering all evening, writing again until exhaustion, produced a complete first draft. 112 pages that represented Naomi's heart poured onto digital paper. She titled it Broken Chains, a story of captivity and freedom, service and sovereignty. On a chilly November evening, 3 days before the triplets' 3rd birthday, Naomi sat at her kitchen table counting coins from a jar labeled Birthday Fund. $7.43, she murmured, disappointment crushing her chest. After rent, utilities, daycare, and groceries, she'd managed to save only this pitiful amount for her son's celebration. Not enough for even a modest cake from the bakery, let alone the small presents she'd hoped to provide. Her phone buzzed with an email notification. Probably another bill, she thought wearily, but opened it anyway. The subject line made her blink in confusion. Sundance Institute Writers Lab, application result. 2 months earlier, Zoe had insisted she apply to the prestigious program, which provided mentorship to emerging screenwriters. The application fee had been steep, $50 she could ill afford, but Zoe had covered it as an early Christmas gift. Naomi's hands trembled as she read, "Dear Ms. Taylor, we are pleased to inform you that your screenplay Broken Chains has been selected for the Sundance Institute's Screenwriters Lab. Your powerful narrative voice and authentic perspective impressed our selection committee unanimously. The program includes a 2-week intensive workshop in Park City, Utah, with full scholarship coverage, including airfare, accommodation, and a $2,000 stipend for additional expenses. A scream escaped her lips, startling the triplets who had been quietly playing with wooden blocks in the corner. They looked up, wide-eyed, as their usually composed mother jumped from her chair. "Mommy?" Elijah, always the spokesperson, asked cautiously. Naomi dropped to her knees, gathering all three into a tight embrace. "Good news, my loves. Mommy got very good news." Their confusion transformed to delight as she began dancing around the room with them, their identical giggles harmonizing in the tiny apartment. When the celebration subsided, reality crashed back. 2 weeks away. Impossible. Who would care for her sons? Hands shaking, she called Zoe. "I can't accept," she said immediately when her friend answered. 2 weeks in Utah? The boys will stay with me," Zoe interrupted calmly. "I've already cleared my schedule for those dates. Maya and Rachel from the support group will help when I'm working." "You knew?" Naomi gasped. "I hoped," Zoe corrected. "The Artist Mothers Network exists for exactly this reason, so women don't have to choose between their creative work and their children." Tears streamed down Naomi's face. "But no buts," Zoe said firmly. "This is your chance, Naomi. The doors this will open. You can't turn it down." 1 week before her departure, driven by an impulse she couldn't explain, Naomi took the subway to Upper East Side. Hidden behind sunglasses and a wool hat, she positioned herself across from Victor's building, the luxury high-rise where she had once lived in the servants' quarters. The January wind bit through her inadequate coat as she waited, questioning her own sanity. What did she hope to see? Why reopen this wound? After 40 minutes, a black town car pulled up to the entrance. The doorman rushed forward with an umbrella, opening the rear door with practiced deference. Victor emerged first, more silver at his temples than she remembered, but still devastatingly handsome in a bespoke overcoat. He turned, extending his hand to a slender blonde woman in a camel hair coat who stepped out gracefully. Behind her came a small boy, perhaps 2 years old, with Victor's distinctive features and coloring. The perfect family portrait. Father, mother, son. Singular. The life Victor had chosen instead of acknowledging his 3 identical sons currently napping in a Brooklyn basement apartment. Something hardened in Naomi's chest as she watched Victor lift his legitimate son, adjusting the boy's cashmere scarf with paternal tenderness. The same hands that had written her dismissal check now carefully protected this chosen child from the cold. Back in her apartment while the triplets slept, Naomi opened her worn journal, a dollar store purchase that had become her confidant through the hardest nights. In careful script, she wrote, "Today I saw what you chose instead of us. Your heir, your perfect genetic continuation, carried in your arms with pride. Today I also received confirmation that the story you never wanted told will be nurtured by the most prestigious film institute in America. One day, Victor Harrington, you will look at me not as the housekeeper you discarded but as the woman you should have valued. One day, our sons will be living proof of your greatest mistake, and when that day comes, I won't need revenge. My success will be punishment enough. I promise by Elijah, Isaiah, and Noah, we will not merely survive, we will dominate this city that tried to destroy us." As she packed for Utah, entrusting her precious sons to Zoe's care, Naomi carried this promise like armor around her heart. The Sundance Institute would be her crucible, transforming raw talent into professional skill. She would return not just as a mother fighting for survival, but as a voice demanding to be heard. While boarding the plane to Salt Lake City, script tucked securely in her carry-on, Naomi couldn't predict that in less than 5 years, she would be the one choosing which projects to finance with her own production label. The Utah mountains faded behind her as Naomi's plane descended toward New York, her mind still buzzing with the transformative 2 weeks at the Sundance Screenwriters Lab. Her manuscript, once a therapeutic outpouring of pain, had been refined into a professional screenplay under the guidance of industry veterans who saw in her raw talent what Victor had failed to recognize: her innate ability to transform suffering into art. Zoe waited at the arrivals gate, the triplets bouncing excitedly beside her. At 3 years old, they had grown noticeably in just 14 days, their identical faces lighting up when they spotted their mother. "Mommy!" they chorused, rushing toward her with synchronized enthusiasm. Naomi dropped her bag, kneeling to gather all three into her arms, inhaling their familiar scent. "My loves, I've missed you so much." "Did you write a movie?" Noah asked, his vocabulary the most advanced of the three. "Yes, baby, Mommy wrote a movie." What followed was a whirlwind unlike anything Naomi could have imagined. Broken Chains generated immediate interest after the Sundance Lab, with 3 independent production companies competing for rights. The bidding war, modest by Hollywood standards but life-changing for a single mother barely scraping by, ended with Vertical Films offering $400,000 plus a percentage of future earnings. "This is standard boilerplate language," explained the entertainment lawyer Zoe had insisted she hire, pointing to contract clauses during a tense negotiation meeting in a sleek Tribeca office. "But we want to modify this section about rights to sequels and adaptations." Naomi sat stiffly in her only professional outfit, a navy blazer from a consignment store and slacks she'd altered herself, while across the table, 2 experienced producers in designer suits assessed her. Zoe sat beside her, occasionally whispering guidance. "We're offering considerably above market for a first-time screenwriter," said Michael Stein, Vertical's head of development, especially one with no formal training. "You're offering market rate for a screenplay that generated interest from 3 companies," Zoe countered smoothly. "The lack of formal training is irrelevant. The voice is authentic precisely because it comes from lived experience." After 3 hours of negotiation, Naomi signed the contract with a hand that trembled slightly. $400,000 for the screenplay and adaptation rights, plus 5% of net profits. The sum was staggering to someone who had been counting coins for birthday cake money mere months earlier. Production moved rapidly. Veteran director Gabriela Fuentes, known for her unflinching portrayals of marginalized experiences, signed on immediately after reading the script. "This story cut through my chest," Gabriela told Naomi during their first meeting. "It's not just about abandonment, it's about America's broken promises to those who come seeking better lives." Filming began in Brooklyn, using real locations that mirrored Naomi's own journey. She visited the set whenever childcare allowed, watching actors breathe life into characters born from her pain. Zaria Mbeki, the acclaimed actress playing Nadia, sought Naomi out between takes. "How did you survive such humiliation without breaking?" Zaria asked during a lunch break while crew members reset for the next scene, Nadia being evicted from her employer's mansion in the rain. Naomi watched her sons playing near the craft services table where a production assistant was helping them select fruit. "I broke 1,000 times," she answered quietly, "and I rebuilt myself 1,001. The film, produced on a modest $3 million budget, premiered at the Cannes Film Festival in May of 2013. Naomi, now 30 years old, sat in the ornate theater, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. The triplets, formally dressed in identical miniature tuxedos, sat beside her, unusually subdued by the grand surroundings. When the credits rolled, silence held the audience for 3 breathless seconds. Then, like a wave breaking, applause thundered through the theater. People rose to their feet, turning toward where Naomi sat with her children. The applause continued, swelling rather than diminishing, as attendees recognized the raw truth they had witnessed. "Mommy, why are they clapping so long?" Isaiah whispered, his small hand clutching hers. "Because they feel what we've been through," she whispered back. 12 minutes. The ovation lasted 12 full minutes, timed by festival officials. When Gabriela Fuentes beckoned Naomi to join the cast and crew on stage, she hesitated only briefly before taking her son's hands. "Come with Mommy," she told them. You deserve this moment as much as I do." The sight of Naomi Taylor ascending to the stage, 3 identical boys in tow, became the festival's defining image. Under the blinding lights, she approached the microphone, her voice steady despite her racing heart. "Thank you for recognizing this story," she began, "and allow me to introduce Elijah, Isaiah, and Noah, my producers." Laughter rippled through the audience. "No, I'm serious. Without them, this film wouldn't exist. They are my reason for writing, for persevering when giving up seemed logical. When their father told me I was born to serve, not to lead, he couldn't imagine that his rejection would fuel the creation of something that would touch so many hearts." Camera flashes exploded as photographers captured the moment. 3 small boys with identical emerald eyes standing proudly beside their mother as she accepted the festival's Best Screenplay award. The next morning, Naomi's phone rang incessantly with calls from major studios offering development deals. The New York Times featured her family's photograph on the front page with the headline, "From Adversity to Triumph, New York's Newest Voice." "You need to capitalize on this momentum," urged her newly acquired agent, a formidable woman recommended by Gabriella. "I have offers from Warner, Universal, 3 streaming platforms, all wanting first-look deals for your next project." Sitting in her modest Brooklyn apartment, now decorated with the triplets' artwork and a framed Cannes Festival poster, Naomi made the decision that would define her career. "I'm turning them all down," she announced to Zoe, who had stopped by to help sort through the overwhelming number of offers. "What? Naomi? These are career-making opportunities. Working for someone else means serving their vision, not mine." Naomi opened her laptop, showing a business plan document she'd been developing. "I'm starting my own production company. I'll use the screenplay advance and award money as seed capital." Zoe stared at her friend with newfound respect. "You're serious. Deadly serious. I'll call it Triumph Productions. We'll focus exclusively on stories about women who survived abandonment and found power in their resilience." Her agent was appalled. "You're rejecting a 7-figure development deal to start a company in your apartment? With no experience in production?" "I had no experience in screenwriting either," Naomi countered. "Sometimes inexperience is an advantage. You don't know what's supposed to be impossible." The first office of Triumph Productions occupied 30 square meters in a rundown building in Queens, furnished with second-hand desks and a sagging couch where the triplets could nap after school. The rent consumed a significant portion of Naomi's remaining capital, but the space represented something priceless: autonomy. On the day she signed the lease, Naomi carefully hung a framed poster of Broken Chains on the wall, positioning it where clients would see it immediately upon entering. The film's tagline, "Some chains break you, others break for you," seemed appropriate for this new venture. The boys, now 4 years old and attending a community preschool on scholarship, solemnly helped their mother arrange her new office. "Is this our company, Mommy?" asked Elijah, always the first to speak. Naomi knelt to their level, looking into 3 pairs of eyes that still reminded her daily of Victor. "Yes, it is. Mommy is building something that will belong to all of us someday, something no one can take away." "Will we be rich?" Noah inquired practically. "Maybe not rich with money right away," she answered honestly, "but rich with purpose, rich with stories that need telling." That evening, after tucking the boys into their beds, each now with his own small space in their new 2-bedroom apartment, Naomi stood before the poster, tracing the embossed letters of her name under "Screenplay by." "This is just the beginning," she whispered to herself. "One day, it will be produced by, too." While hanging the first framed poster of Broken Chains on the peeling wall of Triumph's office, Naomi couldn't imagine that in less than a decade, that 30-square-meter space would evolve into an entire skyscraper with her name in the lobby. The small poster of Broken Chains seemed to watch over Naomi as she navigated the precarious early days of Triumph Productions. The first year proved brutally challenging. The transition from screenwriter to producer required a steep learning curve. From navigating production insurance to managing talent contracts, each aspect of filmmaking revealed new complexities. "No one's returning my calls," Naomi confessed to Zoe during a particularly difficult week in 2013. "Studios see us as too small. Streamers think we're too niche." "So start smaller," Zoe suggested pragmatically. "Short films, documentaries, build a portfolio that showcases your vision." Taking this advice to heart, Naomi redirected her limited resources toward producing a series of short documentaries profiling women who had rebuilt their lives after abandonment. Working with minimal crews, often filming on borrowed equipment, she stretched every dollar while learning the business from the ground up. Between production meetings, she continued to take occasional acting jobs to supplement her income. The triplets, now growing rapidly at 5 years old, started kindergarten at a public school near their modest Brooklyn apartment, allowing Naomi slightly more freedom to build her fledgling company. "Ms. Taylor," their teacher called one afternoon as Naomi picked them up, "I wanted to discuss the boys' assessments with you." Her heart sank, expecting problems. Instead, the teacher handed her 3 separate reports. "Elijah's mathematical reasoning is extraordinary. He's solving problems at a 3rd-grade level. Isaiah has remarkable musical aptitude. He was improvising melodies on the classroom keyboard that show sophisticated understanding of structure. And Noah," she smiled, "Noah's vocabulary and comprehension are simply astounding. He's reading chapter books meant for children twice his age." Pride swelled in Naomi's chest as she watched her sons on the playground. 3 identical bodies housing such distinct brilliance. Their father's genes may have given them those striking green eyes, but their remarkable minds were nurtured by her perseverance. By 2015, Triumph Productions had completed several short documentaries that performed well on the festival circuit but generated minimal revenue. The company's bank account dwindled dangerously as Naomi rejected projects that didn't align with her vision, despite her financial advisor's warnings. "You need commercial viability," he insisted during a grim review of their finances. "Passion projects don't pay rent." That evening, after tucking the boys into bed in the apartment they'd downsized to when funds grew tight, Naomi stared at her reflection in the bathroom mirror. At 32, faint lines had formed around her eyes, evidence of both laughter and stress. "I won't compromise," she told her reflection firmly, "not after everything we've survived." The next morning, inspiration struck while she prepared breakfast for the triplets, now 7 years old and increasingly aware of their unusual family structure. "Mommy," Elijah asked, watching her flip pancakes, "why don't we have a daddy like other kids?" Instead of the simplified explanation she usually offered, Naomi found herself sharing more of the truth. "Your father didn't believe I could be successful without him. He thought women like me, single mothers, especially black single mothers, couldn't build something valuable." "That's stupid," Noah declared with 7-year-old certainty. "You built us, and we're valuable." His innocent wisdom sparked an idea. What if she created a documentary series about single mothers who had built successful enterprises, women who, like her, had been dismissed, abandoned, underestimated, yet thrived despite the odds? "Heroines Invisible," she titled the project, quickly outlining 6 episodes featuring mothers who had founded companies while raising children alone. Her excitement was quickly tempered when every major platform rejected the concept. "Single motherhood isn't aspirational content," one executive explained condescendingly. "Our viewers want escapism, princesses, celebrities, glamour." "These women are more heroic than any fictional princess," Naomi argued. But the meeting ended without a deal. Desperate but undeterred, Naomi made a bold decision. "We'll finance it ourselves," she announced to her small team, now consisting of Zoe as creative partner and 2 recent film school graduates working for minimal pay. "With what money?" Zoe asked pragmatically. "Crowdfunding. We'll go directly to the audience these networks are ignoring, the millions of women who don't see themselves represented in mainstream media." The campaign launched with a powerful video, Naomi and the triplets in their small apartment, her voice narrating the statistics about single mothers in America, while images of struggling women transitioned to success stories. "Society tells these women their burdens," her voiceover concluded. "We want to show they're actually the backbone of our economy. Help us tell their stories." The initial goal of $200,000 seemed ambitious for a company with no track record of full-length productions. But something unexpected happened. Women began sharing the campaign with their own 15-second testimonials. Single mothers, daughters of single mothers, friends of single mothers, each adding personal stories of resilience. "My mother cleaned houses at night while studying nursing," one young doctor shared. "Now she's my inspiration for serving underprivileged communities." The campaign exploded, reaching its goal in 11 days and ultimately raising $1,200,000, 6 times their target. Production began immediately, with Naomi's team traveling across the country on shoestring budgets, staying in budget motels and carrying their own equipment to interview remarkable women. A baker in Detroit who built a national dessert brand while raising 4 children in a shelter. A Texas rancher who took over her ex-husband's failing business and transformed it into a sustainable agriculture model. A tech entrepreneur in Seattle who coded her first app during her newborn's nap times. When the first episode was roughly edited, Naomi released a 3-minute trailer online. The response was instantaneous and overwhelming. 1 million views in 24 hours, then 3 million, then 10 million. Then came the call she never expected. "This is Jeremy Wright from Netflix Acquisition," the voice said when she answered her cell phone while supervising the triplets' homework. "We've been watching your Heroines Invisible trailer making waves online. Perhaps we were hasty in our initial assessment." The irony wasn't lost on Naomi. The same platform that had rejected her concept now wanted to acquire it after public validation proved its worth. "We're prepared to offer a very competitive package," Wright continued. "Full distribution, marketing support, and potential for multiple seasons." "With full creative control remaining with Triumph," Naomi countered, her voice steady despite her racing heart. The negotiation resulted in a 5-year production deal valued at $45 million, a seismic shift in Triumph's trajectory. The contract, signed in Netflix's sleek Manhattan offices, included a critical clause: producer retains complete creative control over content and messaging. As Heroines Invisible debuted to critical acclaim and remarkable viewership metrics, Naomi's personal life transformed alongside her professional success. The Taylors moved to a sun-filled apartment in Brooklyn Heights, with a bedroom for each boy and, for the first time, a dedicated office space for Naomi. The triplets, now 7 years old, flourished in their new environment. Elijah created a rudimentary algorithm to predict weather patterns that impressed his science teacher enough to connect him with a university professor. Isaiah received a scholarship for after-school music lessons, his natural talent with string instruments becoming immediately apparent. Noah wrote stories that his teachers submitted to young authors' competitions, winning regional recognition. One evening, Naomi stood in the doorway of their bedrooms, watching her sons sleep. Though their faces remained identical, their developing personalities had become distinctly their own. Only their eyes, those unmistakable emerald eyes, remained a constant reminder of Victor Harrington. "They have his eyes," she whispered to herself, "but their hearts and determination are mine." The success of Heroines Invisible allowed Naomi to establish the Three Brothers Foundation, providing scholarships and support to single mothers in vulnerable situations. At the ribbon-cutting ceremony, the triplets stood proudly beside her, 7 years old and understanding enough to know the significance of helping others who shared their early struggles. The foundation's first scholarship recipient arrived that same day, a pregnant 19-year-old Latina woman abandoned by her banker boyfriend after 3 years together. "I don't know how I'll manage," the young woman confessed, hands protectively cradling her belly. Naomi embraced her gently. "Your child won't define your limits," she promised. He will expand your horizons. The Triumph team expanded from 3 to 30 employees within a year, primarily women returning to the workforce after maternity leave. Their office relocated from Queens to a proper suite in downtown Brooklyn with a dedicated playroom for employees' children. While signing the incorporation papers for Triumph Media, expanding the small production company into an entertainment conglomerate, Naomi couldn't imagine that in just 5 years, she would be poised to acquire the media company of the man who had said she was born merely to serve. The incorporation papers for Triumph Media sat on the mahogany desk, the ink still fresh on Naomi's signature. She gazed out the floor-to-ceiling windows of her downtown Brooklyn office, watching the skyline of Manhattan glitter across the East River. 7 years had passed since she'd started Triumph Productions in that tiny Queens office with second-hand furniture and desperate determination. "Ms. Taylor?" Her assistant's voice came through the intercom. "Your 10 o'clock is here." "Send them in," Naomi replied, smoothing the lapels of her tailored Prada suit, a far cry from the consignment store blazer she'd worn to her first production meetings. The boardroom of Triumph Media hummed with anticipation as Naomi presided over the quarterly review. Executives presented growth projections, development slates, and acquisition targets with precision. Financial charts displayed on wall-sized screens showed an upward trajectory that even the most optimistic forecasts hadn't predicted 3 years earlier. Fourth quarter revenue exceeded projections by 17%, announced Marcus James, her chief operating officer and trusted lieutenant since the company's earliest days. "Our streaming division has surpassed all competitors in content engagement metrics for underrepresented audiences." Naomi nodded, absorbing the information with practiced calm. At 37, she had developed the poised demeanor of someone accustomed to power. The struggling single mother counting coins for birthday cake had transformed into a media mogul whose decisions affected thousands of careers and millions of viewers. "And the publishing division acquisition?" she inquired. "Finalized yesterday," Marcus confirmed. "Triumph Literary is officially operational. We've already signed 3 major authors whose work aligns with our mission." As the meeting concluded, Naomi remained seated while her team filed out. Marcus lingered behind. "Fortune magazine called again," he said. "They're insisting on an interview for their 50 most powerful women in business issue. Forbes, too." Naomi sighed. "Schedule the Forbes interview. Their business coverage is more substantive." "And the profile they want to do on the boys?" "Absolutely not," she replied firmly. "They're 14 now. Their privacy isn't negotiable." The triplets' protection from public scrutiny had become Naomi's obsession as Triumph's profile rose. Despite numerous offers for family features and even reality show concepts, she had maintained an impenetrable barrier between her sons and the media's prying eyes. Later that afternoon, Naomi's town car glided through Manhattan traffic toward the prestigious Dalton School. Though she could now afford a driver, she still preferred to pick up her sons personally whenever her schedule allowed. The boys had received full academic scholarships 3 years earlier, their exceptional talents impossible to ignore despite Naomi's attempts to give them normal childhoods. Waiting outside the imposing stone building, she watched as students streamed out in expensive uniforms. Her sons emerged together yet distinctly separate, no longer the perfectly identical trio of their younger years. At 14, they had each developed their own style within the school's dress code. Elijah's tie perfectly knotted, Noah's blazer customized with subtle artistic pins, Isaiah's violin case slung across his shoulder. "How was the presentation?" she asked as they slid into the car. "I crushed it," Elijah replied with quiet confidence. "MIT's representative wants to see the full algorithm. She says my predictive market modeling could have commercial applications." Naomi squeezed his hand, pride swelling in her chest. "And the recital, Isaiah?" "Carnegie Hall confirmed," he answered, his fingers unconsciously moving in silent practice. "April 17th, first chair for the Young Artists Showcase." Noah, her youngest, by 11 minutes, looked up from his notebook. "My editor sent final proofs. The novel goes to print next week. At 13, Noah had written a young adult novel exploring identity and belonging that had sparked a bidding war among publishers. The irony that Triumph Literary had been outbid for his debut wasn't lost on Naomi. At home in their Tribeca penthouse, deliberately purchased in a building newer and more exclusive than Victor's, Naomi watched her sons scatter to their various pursuits. Though they shared identical DNA and striking emerald eyes, their divergent passions had shaped them into distinct individuals. Over dinner, prepared by their part-time chef, another luxury Naomi still found surreal, the conversation turned to their father, as it occasionally did. Jason's dad showed up at career day, Noah mentioned casually. He talked about investment banking. Made me wonder what our father does. Naomi set down her fork carefully. We've discussed this. When you're ready to know more about him, I'll tell you everything. We're 14, Mom, Elijah countered. At what age do you consider us ready? She studied their identical faces, the perfect blend of her features and Victor's. It's not about age. It's about protecting you from painful truths. Like the fact that he didn't want us? Isaiah asked quietly. Or that he paid you to disappear? Noah added. Naomi's breath caught. How did you? We've always known the basics, Elijah explained. We've heard you talking to Aunt Zoe over the years. We know he was wealthy, powerful, and chose his reputation over acknowledging us. What we don't know, Isaiah continued, is his name, who he is, whether he ever regretted his choice. Naomi's hands trembled slightly. I've never lied to you. I've only waited for the right moment. Is there ever a right moment to learn you were unwanted? Noah's question hung in the air, painfully perceptive. Before she could respond, her phone chimed with Marcus's ringtone. She answered gratefully, needing the interruption. The researchers found something interesting, Marcus said without preamble. Victor Harrington was just named CEO of Harrington Financial Group following his father's retirement. Naomi's fingers tightened around the phone. Send me everything. After the boys retreated to their rooms, Naomi reviewed the confidential file her team had compiled. Victor's life since their parting had been a series of calculated moves and strategic failures. 2 marriages, 2 divorces, the second particularly messy and public. A financial scandal narrowly averted through family connections. The recent appointment as CEO seemed more nepotism than merit, as the Harrington Financial Group's value had decreased substantially under his leadership. Most interesting was the section about Harrington Media Ventures, the conglomerate's entertainment division, hastily sold off to generate capital after significant losses during the market downturn. The company was now underperforming under its new corporate parent. Subvalued assets, Naomi murmured, studying the portfolio. Untapped intellectual property. Incompetent management. A plan began forming in her mind, not born from vengeance, but from business acumen and perhaps a touch of poetic justice. The following morning, Marcus entered her office holding a silver envelope. It arrived by courier. The Metropolitan Museum of Art's Finance and Arts Gala invitation. Naomi accepted the luxurious card. Theme: Power and Legacy in Modern America. How appropriate. Considering Forbes just named you one of the 50 most powerful women in business, and we're the primary sponsors of the Contemporary Film Wing, your presence is more expected than requested, Marcus observed. Naomi examined the invitation, a subtle smile forming on her lips. It's time, isn't it? The boys are ready for their first major public appearance. Are you sure? You've always been so protective of them. They're 14, Marcus, and they're ready to understand who they are and where they came from. She paused, running her fingers over the textured paper. Besides, Triumph is about to announce the acquisition of Harrington Media Ventures. It would be appropriate for the family to be present for that milestone. Marcus's eyes widened. You've been planning this for years, haven't you? Naomi merely smiled, turning her attention back to the Manhattan skyline. I suggest Armani for Isaiah, perhaps Tom Ford for Elijah. Noah will probably insist on Alexander McQueen. The night before the gala, in her Tribeca penthouse, ironically on the same floor but in a newer, more luxurious building than Victor's former apartment, Naomi prepared her sons for their debut in New York high society. Tomorrow you'll meet people who govern this city. Observe, learn, but remember, you have nothing to prove to anyone. She adjusted Elijah's tie during their final rehearsal. You are tailors. Our strength comes from knowing who we are, not from who recognizes us. The three teenagers, now taller than their mother, solemnly nodded. With features that combined Naomi's Jamaican beauty and Harrington's aristocratic contours, they were an impressive sight, especially together. Will we have to answer questions about our father? Noah asked, always the most direct. Naomi paused, carefully choosing her words. Perhaps. And if asked, be honest. You don't know him. He chose not to be part of our lives. What Naomi didn't reveal to her sons that night was that, for the first time in 15 years, she and Victor Harrington would be in the same environment. Her research department had confirmed that the newly appointed CEO of the Harrington Financial Group would be present as the Met's Financial Committee representative, an obligation he couldn't avoid. On the morning of the gala, as she prepared, Naomi observed her reflection in the mirror. At 40, her features had matured with serene dignity. The exclusive Oscar de la Renta gown, created especially for the occasion, combined classic elegance with an undeniable subtext of unquestionable power. It wasn't merely beautiful, it was a statement. I'm ready, she murmured to herself, referring not just to the evening's event, but to the 15-year delayed reckoning. As her limousine approached the Metropolitan Museum of Art, Naomi Taylor, the same woman who had once cleaned Victor Harrington's penthouse out of necessity, took a deep breath, preparing to enter not as a guest, but as one of New York's principal arts patrons, accompanied by the three young princes of her empire. As the limousine glided toward the Metropolitan Museum of Art, the lights of Manhattan reflected against the tinted windows, casting a golden glow across Naomi's face. Her three sons sat opposite her, resplendent in their designer suits, Elijah in Tom Ford, Isaiah in Armani, Noah in Alexander McQueen, just as she had predicted. 15 years of careful planning had led to this moment. Remember, she said softly, tonight isn't about him, it's about celebrating what we've built together. The boys nodded in unison, their emerald eyes, Victor's unmistakable genetic signature, bright with anticipation. They had no idea they were about to come face to face with their biological father. The vehicle stopped at the museum's grand entrance where photographers and journalists lined the red carpet. As soon as the door opened, camera flashes erupted like lightning. The Taylor family's arrival had been anticipated, but the sight of Naomi with her three identical sons making their first public appearance created an instant sensation. Ms. Taylor, over here. Naomi, introduce us to your boys. Triumph Media's first family. Look this way. Naomi navigated the carpet with practiced grace, her Oscar de la Renta gown flowing behind her like dark water. The triplets followed, handling the attention with surprising poise, responding to questions with brief, polite answers as their mother had coached them. Inside the museum's great hall, New York's elite mingled beneath soaring marble arches. Art, finance, politics, and entertainment converged in this annual display of power and influence, precisely the environment Victor Harrington had once claimed Naomi could never access except as serving staff. In a corner near the Temple of Dender, Victor stood conversing with fellow Wall Street executives, looking distinguished if somewhat careworn at 53. Silver streaked his once golden hair, and fine lines had deepened around his eyes, but he remained handsome in the aristocratic way that had once captivated Naomi. "Quite the turnout this year," remarked Spencer Rothstein, sipping champagne. "The Met outdid themselves with the guest list." "Indeed," Victor replied absently, checking his watch. These functions had become tedious obligations, necessary for maintaining the Harrington family's social position especially after the financial difficulties that had forced him to sell off significant assets, including the once profitable Harrington Media Ventures. "Seems the star of the evening has arrived," Rothstein commented, nodding toward the entrance where a noticeable commotion had erupted. Victor turned disinterestedly, expecting some movie star or musician, then froze, his champagne flute suspended halfway to his lips. 15 years vanished in an instant. Though she had transformed from the young housekeeper he had discarded into a commanding presence that drew every eye in the room, he recognized her immediately. Naomi Taylor moved through the crowd with regal confidence, her gown's subtle gold embroidery catching the light with each step. But it was the three young men beside her that drained the blood from Victor's face. The triplets, tall for 14, were carbon copies of one another, and unmistakably, undeniably, versions of himself as a teenager. The same emerald eyes, the same jawline, the same dark blonde wavy hair, though with Naomi's richer texture. It was like seeing ghosts of his youth multiplied by 3. "Victor? Are you all right?" Rothstein asked, noticing his sudden pallor. "Who?" His voice emerged as a strangled whisper. "Who are those young men with Naomi Taylor?" Rothstein glanced over, eyebrows raised. "The famous Taylor triplets, of course. First public appearance. Word is the middle one, Isaiah, is a musical prodigy who's already received offers from Juilliard, and the eldest developed some algorithm worth millions. Impressive how she kept them out of the spotlight all these years." Victor clutched his champagne glass, draining it in one desperate swallow. "How old are they?" 14, I believe. Why? Do you know Taylor from somewhere?" Before Victor could respond, the master of ceremonies tapped a microphone, calling for attention. "Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome our distinguished guests to the annual Finance and Arts Gala. This year's theme, Power and Legacy in Modern America, celebrates those who shape our cultural and economic landscape." Victor barely heard the introductions that followed, his eyes fixed on Naomi as she was escorted to a place of honor near the front. The boys, his sons, moved with a self-assurance that spoke of careful upbringing and inherent confidence. "And we are especially honored to welcome Naomi Taylor, visionary founder of Triumph Media, the most influential independent media company of the past decade and principal donor of the Met's new film wing." Applause filled the grand space. Victor noticed several financial titans nodding respectfully toward Naomi, the same men who had once dismissed her as Harrington's exotic housekeeper at cocktail parties she had served rather than attended. Throughout dinner, Victor couldn't tear his gaze from the table where Naomi sat with the triplets, animatedly conversing with museum directors and celebrities. Occasionally she smiled that smile he had once considered charmingly naive, but which now exuded absolute confidence. When the time came for speeches, the Met's president approached the podium. "It is with immense pleasure that we announce the largest individual donation ever received for our cinematic arts program. Naomi Taylor and Triumph Media have committed $75 million to the preservation and exhibition of works by underrepresented filmmakers." Thunderous applause erupted as Naomi rose with practiced grace and walked to the microphone. Her gaze briefly met Victor's, a moment imperceptible to all except them. "Art saves us in many ways," she began, her melodic voice echoing through the hall. 15 years ago, I was an abandoned young woman, pregnant, without resources or hope. Today, I stand before you not merely as a survivor, but as proof that narratives can be rewritten." She paused, an enigmatic smile playing on her lips. "I'd like to introduce the reasons for my success. My greatest production, Elijah, Isaiah, and Noah Taylor. Come, my loves." The 3 teenagers joined their mother on stage, drawing gasps of admiration from the audience. Under the lights, their resemblance to Victor became even more striking, a fact that didn't escape the attendees, who began whispering and glancing in his direction. These extraordinary young men were born in circumstances that should have limited them. Their biological father claimed that children like them, born on the wrong side of the social hierarchy, were destined to serve, never to lead. She looked directly at Victor. Today, I'm pleased to announce that Triumph Media has just finalized the acquisition of Harrington Media Ventures for $360 million. A shocked murmur swept through the hall. Harrington Media Ventures had been Victor's entertainment division, hastily sold to raise capital after significant losses during the financial crisis. "The irony doesn't escape me," Naomi continued, her voice calm yet cutting. "The Maid now owns what once belonged to the master. But this isn't a story of revenge. It's a lesson about value, about recognizing potential where others see only servitude." The presentation ended with a standing ovation, while Victor remained petrified in his seat, aware of the stares and whispers around him. His new wife, 26 years his junior, leaned toward a nearby socialite, clearly asking what was happening. During the reception that followed, Victor maneuvered desperately through the crowd until he found Naomi surrounded by admirers near the main exhibition. He waited impatiently until he managed a moment alone with her. "Naomi," he said, his voice betraying his nervousness. "We need to talk." She turned, studying him with eyes that revealed nothing. "Mr. Harrington, what a surprise. Please, can we speak privately about the boys?" "Interesting how you refer to them as the boys now. 15 years ago you called them your problem." "I made a terrible mistake," he whispered urgently. "You can't deny a father the right to know his children." Naomi raised a perfect eyebrow. "Father? A sperm donor isn't a father, Mr. Harrington. A father is present, one who teaches, protects, loves. I can make up for lost time. I have resources." "Resources?" She laughed, a musical sound that drew curious glances. "Your company is worth less than a third of mine, Victor. What exactly do you think you can offer that my sons don't already have?" Isaiah approached at that moment, unaware of the tension. "Mom, the curator wants to show us the new multimedia installation." Victor stared at the teenager, his own image reflected 15 years back with palpable emotion. "Hello, Isaiah," he said, extending a trembling hand. The young man looked at the extended hand with polite confusion. "Do we know each other, sir?" "Isaiah, this is Victor Harrington," Naomi introduced calmly, "a former employer of mine." The teenager's eyes lit with recognition. "Oh, the man who sold his media division to us. I read about the acquisition in the report Noah prepared. It was a smart financial move on our part. The assets were undervalued." Victor felt the blow of those innocent words more deeply than any direct insult. His own son clinically analyzing his business failures without any idea of the biological connection between them. "If you'll excuse us," Naomi continued, "my sons have an appointment with the curator." As she walked away, she added in a low voice, just for Victor to hear, "You said I was born to serve and you to lead. Look at us now and tell me who was destined for what." The evening continued like a nightmare for Victor. Everywhere he looked, he saw Naomi being celebrated, his sons, his children, being admired for their brilliance and sophistication. Comments about the striking resemblance between the triplets and him began circulating more openly, especially after an influential New York Post columnist posted a side-by-side comparison on Instagram with the caption, "Genetic coincidence or Manhattan's secret?" The final blow came when Victor, trying to escape the whispers, found himself in a side gallery where a temporary Triumph Media exhibition displayed the original poster of Broken Chains, the film that launched Naomi's career. Beside it, a quote from her in golden letters, "Dedicated to the man who told me I wasn't enough. Your rejection was my liberation." Victor stood frozen before the exhibition, the golden letters of Naomi's quote burning into his consciousness like a brand. "Dedicated to the man who told me I wasn't enough. Your rejection was my liberation." The bitter truth of those words settled over him as the gala continued around him, a swirl of champagne and privilege that suddenly felt hollow. Morning light streamed through the floor-to-ceiling windows of Naomi's Tribeca penthouse as headlines exploded across every media platform. The New York Times splashed across its front page, "CEO of Triumph Media acquires division of ex-patron who abandoned her pregnant." Page 6 featured comparative photos of Victor and the triplets under the glaring headline, "The Denied Heirs, Wall Street's 15-Year Secret." Naomi prepared coffee in the sleek kitchen while the triplets, unusually silent, studied the headlines on their tablets. The rhythmic tapping of Elijah's fingers against the screen provided the only soundtrack to their morning routine, a stark contrast to their typical animated breakfast discussions. Noah finally broke the silence, his voice steady despite the weight of his words. "So Victor Harrington is our biological father." It wasn't a question. Naomi placed her coffee cup carefully on the marble countertop and sat down, facing her sons directly. "Yes," she answered, meeting their identical emerald gazes. "I was waiting for the right moment to tell you." "The moment when you bought his company?" Elijah asked, always the most direct. "Number." She took a deep breath. "The moment when you would be prepared to understand that a man can create life and still not be worthy of being called a father." "Why did he reject us?" Isaiah's voice trembled slightly, the musical quality that made him a prodigy now lending vulnerability to his question. "Because he valued his reputation and social position more than the possibility of loving you." Naomi reached across the table, touching each son's fingers in turn. "He made the greatest mistake of his life, and you are the living proof of that mistake." "Will he try to be part of our lives now?" Noah asked, the novelist's mind already considering possible plot developments. As if answering his question, Naomi's phone rang. It was Marcus, her operations director. "We have a situation," he said without preamble. "Victor Harrington is in the lobby demanding to see you and the boys. He brought lawyers." Naomi showed no surprise. "Keep them there. We're coming down." In the luxurious lobby of their building, Victor waited accompanied by two men in expensive suits, briefcases open on the center table. When he saw Naomi emerging from the elevator with the triplets, he stood abruptly, his face a study in desperate determination. "Naomi," he began, attempting a conciliatory tone, "we need to resolve this like adults. These are Richard Klein and Jonathan Stein, my attorneys. I have legal rights as the biological father." "Actually, you don't," Naomi interrupted calmly. "Your rights expired when you denied paternity in the document you signed in 2008, stating that any child I might be carrying could not be yours." Victor paled. "What document?" "The one you signed along with my final check. You were so eager to be rid of me that you didn't even read what you were signing." The lawyers exchanged uncomfortable glances. "Even so," Victor continued, "I want to be part of their lives. I can offer opportunities, connections." "Mr. Harrington," Elijah stepped forward, his posture mirroring Victor's own unconscious mannerisms. "With all due respect, we don't need your connections. We already have our own." "And regarding opportunities," Isaiah added, "my investment algorithm has already attracted acquisition offers from 3 banks larger than yours. Not to mention," Noah completed, "that any legal attempt to establish paternity would require public exposure through DNA testing, which, considering the moral clause in your current company's contract, could be problematic for you." Victor stared at the 3 teenagers, astonished by their maturity and astuteness. "You are extraordinary," he murmured. "Yes, they are," Naomi agreed. "And they became so without a penny or a minute of your time." Vulnerability finally cracked Victor's facade. "Please," his voice faltered, "I'm not asking to be your father. I know I don't deserve that. I'm asking for a chance to know you." The triplets looked at their mother, who nodded imperceptibly. This was a decision they would make. "We can consider occasional meetings," Elijah finally responded. "On our terms. without expectations of a paternal relationship. And without publicity, Isaiah added. We don't want to be known as Victor Harrington's rejected sons. We've already built our own identities. And we need time, Noah concluded. 15 years is a long time to make up for in a few meetings. Victor nodded, gratitude and regret mingling in his expression. Thank you. It's more than I deserve. When the lawyers withdrew, Victor remained for a moment, facing Naomi. You won, he admitted, in every possible way. This was never about winning, Victor. It was about surviving first, then thriving despite you, not because of you. You became everything I said you would never be. She smiled serenely. I became exactly who I always was. You just couldn't see beyond your prejudices. 2 weeks after the confrontation, the dust began to settle. Media interest had shifted to new scandals, though Naomi's status as a symbol of resilience and success had only increased. In her Triumph Media office, she received Warren Buffett, who had requested a meeting to discuss potential investments. As they discussed the company's future, he asked the question many avoided. What motivated you to specifically acquire Harrington's media division? There were more profitable targets in the market. Naomi considered the question for a moment. It wasn't revenge, if that's what you're thinking. It was a purely strategic decision. They had valuable intellectual properties being underutilized by inefficient management. And the fact that it belonged to the man who rejected you? Let's say it was an additional satisfaction, she smiled. But the real triumph wasn't buying his company. It was building a life where that acquisition was just another deal among many. Late that afternoon, Naomi left the office early to attend Isaiah's performance with the New York Philharmonic. As her driver navigated Manhattan, she received an email from Victor. A formal request for Sunday lunch with the triplets, following the established terms. Confirm will be present, she instructed her assistant, and reserve a table at Jean-Georges. The boys liked the Central Park view. When the car stopped in front of Lincoln Center, she spotted her 3 sons waiting at the entrance. Tall, confident, extraordinary in every way. A wave of gratitude enveloped her for the life they had built together. Victor Harrington had been wrong about everything. She hadn't been born to serve, her sons weren't a burden, and a person's value could never be determined by their birth or social position. As she walked toward her sons under Manhattan's setting sun, Naomi Taylor reflected that her greatest victory wasn't the empire she'd built or the fortune she'd amassed. It was the family that had flourished despite abandonment, the unbreakable bonds forged in adversity. And if part of that triumph included seeing the man who had discarded her as insignificant now begging for crumbs of attention from his sons, well, perhaps poetic justice was simply another name for the natural balance of the universe. While observing her sons discussing the terms of their relationship with their biological father, Naomi realized that her true victory wasn't the empire built or Victor's public humiliation. It was having raised 3 young men who, unlike their progenitor, understood the value of compassion even in the face of the greatest injustice. The morning sunlight streamed through the floor-to-ceiling windows of Triumph Media's headquarters, casting a golden glow across the conference room where Naomi sat at the head of the table. 2 weeks had passed since the Met Gala, and the business world was still buzzing with the story of the abandoned housekeeper who had built an empire and then acquired her former employer's failing company. Our stock price has increased 22% since the gala, reported Marcus, sliding a tablet across the polished table. Turns out, the publicity around your personal story has resonated with audiences. People love the narrative of the underdog triumphing over adversity. Naomi studied the upward trajectory on the screen, her expression measured. And Harrington Financial Group? Down 7%, Marcus replied. Shareholders are asking uncomfortable questions about Victor's judgment, both personal and professional. She nodded without satisfaction. This wasn't about destroying Victor. It was about completing a circle, proving that his dismissal had been the beginning, not the end of her story. Later that afternoon, Warren Buffett settled into the chair opposite Naomi's desk, his unassuming demeanor belying his status as one of the world's wealthiest investors. "Your company's growth curve is remarkable," he said, declining an offered espresso. "Particularly in the content division focused on underrepresented voices. You've identified a market everyone else overlooked." "Not overlooked," Naomi corrected. "Deliberately ignored. There have always been audiences hungry for authentic stories." Buffett studied her for a moment. "What motivated you to specifically acquire Harrington's media division? There were more lucrative targets in the market." Naomi considered the question, appreciating his directness. "It wasn't revenge, if that's what you're thinking. It was a strategic decision. They had valuable intellectual properties being underutilized by ineffective management." "And the fact that it belonged to the man who rejected you?" Buffett pressed gently. A slight smile touched her lips. "Let's say that was an additional satisfaction. But the real triumph wasn't buying his company. It was building a life where that acquisition was just another business deal among many." After Buffett departed, Naomi stood at her office window, watching Manhattan's skyline shimmer in the afternoon light. 15 years ago, she had viewed these same buildings from below, a pregnant housekeeper carrying a suitcase and $20,000, an amount that had seemed simultaneously enormous and insultingly inadequate. Her phone chimed with an email notification from an address she had never expected to see in her inbox. VHARRINGTON@HARRINGTONFINANCIALDOTCOM. The subject line read simply, "Request for meeting with E.I.N." The carefully worded message proposed a Sunday lunch at a time and location of Naomi's choosing, following the terms established by the triplets. It was signed formally, "Respectfully, Victor Harrington," with no attempt at false familiarity. "Lisa," she called to her assistant through the intercom, "confirm we'll attend lunch on Sunday. Reserve a table at Jean-Georges. The boys like the Central Park view." That evening, Naomi left the office early to attend Isaiah's performance with the New York Philharmonic Youth Orchestra. As her car navigated the crowded streets, she reflected on how her definition of success had evolved. Once it had been simple survival, keeping her sons fed and housed. Later it became proving Victor wrong about her capabilities. Now it was about legacy, creating something meaningful that would outlast her. The driver pulled up to Lincoln Center where the triplets waited, a striking trio in their matching dark overcoats. At 14, they had grown into the early stages of the men they would become, confident, thoughtful, extraordinary, in ways that had nothing to do with their biological father's DNA. "Are you ready for Sunday?" she asked them later that night, after Isaiah's flawless performance had earned a standing ovation. The boys exchanged glances, their silent communication system that had mystified even Naomi since infancy. "We're curious," Elijah admitted, "but not emotionally invested." "He's a stranger who happens to share our genetic material," added Noah, the writer's precision evident in his framing. "We have questions," Isaiah completed the thought. "Scientific, medical, practical questions." Sunday arrived bright and clear, a perfect early spring day. Jean-Georges' prime table overlooking Central Park offered both privacy and spectacular views. Victor arrived 10 minutes early, already seated when Naomi entered with the triplets. He stood immediately, his posture betraying his nervousness despite the expensive suit that hung slightly looser than it once would have, evidence of recent weight loss. "Thank you for coming," he said, eyes moving hungrily over the boys' faces, lingering on the features that mirrored his own. The initial conversation progressed awkwardly, Victor attempting to bridge 15 years of absence with questions about school, interests, and accomplishments. The triplets responded politely but without warmth, offering factual answers that revealed little emotion. "The Harrington family has a history of mathematical aptitude," Victor mentioned when Elijah described his algorithm. "My grandfather pioneered statistical analysis techniques in financial markets," Nature versus nurture is a fascinating debate, Elijah replied coolly, though I suspect my abilities have more to do with Mom ensuring we had educational opportunities despite our circumstances. Isaiah inquired about family medical history, practical information about potential genetic predispositions. Elijah questioned career trajectories in finance, accepting Victor's offer of professional guidance with non-committal politeness. Noah observed more than he spoke, the novelist in him cataloging mannerisms and expressions for future reference. Throughout the meal, Naomi remained largely silent, allowing her sons to navigate this unprecedented terrain on their terms. She noted how Victor's eyes repeatedly returned to the boys' faces, searching for connections, approval, forgiveness. As dessert arrived, Noah, always the most direct, asked the question hovering beneath the superficial conversation. Why did you choose power and status over family? The table fell silent. Victor set down his fork, his practiced Wall Street confidence faltering. For several seconds, he stared at the elaborate chocolate creation before him, seemingly gathering courage. I was trapped in a value system I inherited but never questioned, he finally answered, his voice uncharacteristically raw. My father measured worth entirely by status and achievement. I was raised to believe the Harrington name was everything, that maintaining its position required certain sacrifices. He looked directly at Noah. It was the greatest mistake of my life, one I've had 15 years to regret. The honesty in his response seemed to affect the triplets more than any attempt at justification would have. Something subtle shifted in their posture. Not forgiveness, but perhaps the beginning of understanding. As the meal concluded, Victor hesitantly asked if they might take a photograph together. Just for me, he added quickly. Nothing public. The boys looked to Naomi, who nodded slightly. Their choice. Only if it remains private, Elijah stipulated, speaking for his brothers. As they prepared to leave, Victor addressed Naomi directly for the first time since their arrival. Thank you for raising them to be better men than I could have. I didn't raise them to be better than you, Victor, she replied evenly. I raised them to be who they always were meant to be. In the car heading home, the triplets processed the encounter, their identical features animated with varying emotions. He seems genuinely regretful, Isaiah observed. Regret is easy when you've already lost everything, Noah countered. He hasn't lost everything, Elijah corrected. He's still CEO of a major financial institution. He's lost us and Mom, which he only now realizes was the more valuable asset. Naomi listened to their astute analysis, pride swelling in her chest. These extraordinary young men with their emotional intelligence and clear moral compasses were her true triumph, not the business empire, not the Manhattan penthouse, not even the poetic justice of acquiring Victor's company. As they crossed the Brooklyn Bridge, the Manhattan skyline gleaming in the afternoon sun, she watched her sons, three remarkable individuals who carried the best of their heritage and none of its worst. The boys who had once been dismissed as a problem to be solved with a check were now the living embodiment of potential realized despite every obstacle. While observing her sons walking ahead of her as they exited the car, three exceptional young men who carried the best of their origins and nothing of the worst, Naomi Taylor finally understood that her triumph wasn't in the skyscrapers she owned or the man she had humiliated, but in the living proof that cruel words like, "You were born to serve," could be transformed into the most powerful motivation, the determination to prove that the impossible was merely the misguided opinion of someone who couldn't see beyond their prejudices. If you enjoyed today's video, I'm sure you'll love the next one. Don't waste time. Just click on the screen.